Hello and welcome to another episode of DCU Daily. And today we are talking about, we're talking about a number of different things, but largely we want to talk about James Gunn's DCU. It's a new DC brand as a whole. You know, not just the DCU. It's everything to do with DC. Whether it's that incredible documentary Superman, a Christopher Reeve story, as well as all the Elseworlds projects. You know, those that have come into place since James Gunn signed on, as well as the ones that have been around since in development before James Gunn came aboard. We want to discuss like how James Gunn is defining that whole r- brand basically, which at one point in time was basically neglected by Warner Brothers. So to discuss that and so much more, of course, we're going to talk about Peter Safran as well, his contributions. They're co-CEOs, so it's not just James Gunn, but he's the creative lead, so we will talk about him primarily. So to do that and all that and so much more, like I said, we have of course John here with us. John, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, pretty good. So yeah, this was something that I know obviously this is DCU Daily, so we've talked about, James Gunn a lot and all that, but I think like really honing in the overall tone, I think, what they're aiming for, what like the decisions that we've gotten, like at least showcase from Gunn and Safran and all that. Yeah, I think that's just like a worthy thing to talk about. And I think well, the first things first, when everything was announced, the first thing we got was that James Gunn and Peter Safran were, co-CEOs, and I thought that that was kind of a better way of doing than just having one figurehead like Kevin Feige for Marvel. Why? Well, because I feel like having someone who understands business gets that side, like gets like he understands the business side, the producing side, keeping track of the money, what to do, obviously having like sort of like just like a watchful eye over like, the technical, things of DC. I think that's a good smart idea. But then you have a guy who's directed a lot of movies in the past that, were beloved by not just comic fans, just, general audiences. That's the main thing. And I think he's a guy who has a lot of passion for what he does. And I think he just overall understands how like a fan's mind works because he's a fan. He's someone who is, as you said, in charge of that creative side. And I think having those two guys instead of just one guy who understands everything is just a little bit better because it's just there's like so first off, one guy doesn't have the headache of everything, and two, it just it gives like a little bit more free reign that James Gunn can direct a project, write a project, executively produce a project, that kind of thing. And then Peter Safran will be the man behind everything, and James Gunn just knows, I feel like, what the fans want. And with everything, yeah, the Suicide Squad didn't get a ton of, money and all that, mainly due to, COVID and all of that. But considering like the complete turnaround of like mixed to negative reaction of David Ayer's Suicide Squad, and then just like that jump of like, wow, this just completely reinventing everything, and just essentially just taking that movie, the original movie, and just making it better. And that's what happened. Like him or not, he created a movie that a lot of people liked. So I think that's just overall really helpful, like having two guys instead of one. And I think James Gunn, I would have preferred someone, who's a little bit more evenly balanced, like someone who's done um, a lot of different genres than one genre. So it's not like that skittishness of like, oh, can he do a Superman movie, or can he do this? Can he do that? I think like someone more evenly balanced could have done that a little bit better. But I still think, like, as, a fan, I'm like, "Okay, I appreciate that it seems like a fan who gets." I mean, he's, like, constantly on threads, he's just trying to make sure that, like, anybody who has a question for him, he answers that question. He wants to know how he doesn't wanna, like, be the shadow behind everything. He wants to be out front, he wants to be that public figure that fans can trust, and I kind of appreciate that. So I think that definitely was a good decision from them. Most definitely was having those co-CEOs. There's rarely a problem I think I can see with that, other than maybe if you don't like James Gunn as a director, which fair, like he's not for everybody. But I just think that's an overall really good decision from their part. I think that was definitely I think, they saw, like, what was happening with, Marvel and all that, and was like, "Okay, let's see how we can do it." And with that, moving on to, like, what was announced, I know we've talked about the movies, so we'll, try to keep that short, but I feel like it has, like, a good mix of variety, as we've mentioned, like, there's a lot of variety with the movies and TV shows that were picked, um, things that can go in a lot of different directions. But yeah, I think you have, like, the top money makers of, like, Superman and Batman. You have kinda like a mid-tier character with Supergirl who, like, some people know, maybe because of the TV show, maybe because of the movie, unfortunately, the original movie, I should say. And then you have, like, and I would even say Swamp Thing is, like, kinda low mid-tier, and then you have the Authority, which very little people know. That's definitely, like, almost a deep cut in terms of DC, so you have, like, a good variety of that. Then you have like, sort of, with the TV shows, you have Green Lantern, which is, like, pretty much a lot of people know, mainly because of the original movie, and even Paradise Lost being described as something attributing to Wonder Woman, so that can kinda be, high bar as well. And then you have, like, kind of the mid-tier stuff with, like, a Waller and Booster Gold. Like, some people know Booster Gold maybe because of the animated series of Justice League Unlimited, and Waller being, like, kind of, known with, like, the Suicide Squad, but it's her own TV show, so maybe they're gonna do something way different. And then you have, like, Creature Commandos, which is definitely their, like, deep cut in a way. Like, they're sort of like a weirder thing that not a lot of people know about. And I think that's, like, again, we have that variety. And I think that also works. However, with maybe the movie thing, you have Superman and Supergirl. I think that was kind of a wrong decision. I don't think they should have probably introduced Batman this quickly. And maybe, like, you could have had a little bit more variety in terms of all of this, and, like, given maybe a little bit more information on each thing. I know they don't want to get too far because they're trying to evenly distribute, the it's in the showrunner's hands, kind of thing, like being the creative dominant force. And again, I appreciate that, but I just wish we kind of, got a little bit more information, and maybe, like, just like something, maybe reconfigure some things, maybe not necessarily start with a Superman film, and, kind of going into maybe something a little bit smaller, maybe start out with, like, maybe Swamp Thing, maybe The Authority, and then build off from there, just something weirder to really be like, "Okay, let's see what we'll do that." So there's obviously there's not gonna be a ton of, like, not everything, like, with that through line of all the films and TV shows was, like, the best thing ever, um, in terms of, and then again, like, we've talked about that, how it's like there is still that variety. And I've said that many times where it's like Superman brings something different to the Authority brings something different than Batman, Batman brings something different than Supergirl, and Supergirl brings something different than something. And the same thing for all the TV shows. They bring that variety, and I think the overall tone that we have here is definitely, something that's, I would say, for lack of a better word, campy. And I think we're kind of getting ready to that. I think we're kind of like, you know, shackling off the kind of like gritty, dark, edgy stuff of like the 2010s. and we're just like, okay, let's, bring in, like, obviously we still have like sort of that darker stuff. We do have Joker fully do, we have the Batman, and if the people do still want that darker stuff, then we can go that. Now I feel like we're going for more of like that comic book feel, and we're not necessarily, you know, not necessarily campy for certain things. Maybe Batman or Swamp Thing aren't, necessarily campy, but they're going for more of that, like something not of this world. Like, obviously, I think because someone brought this up many a times when comparing DC and Marvel, not in a bad way, but Marvel for the longest time was considered the darker, realistic one because it took place in the real world. It takes place in New York. That's like the epicenter. You have like, Iron Man and Spider-Man being, the protectors of New York, and then you have like all these real cities that are being mentioned, and that was sort of like more so like about human problems, like how Spider-Man was like this guy who like dealt with like, yeah, he has to, save the world from Dr. Octopus, but then like 2 hours into the day he has to, take a fucking final for school and he can't be late or else he'll fail the course, like something like that, like dealing with more of those human problems. Well, DC was considered the more like child-friendly, jovial, out there, fantasy-driven one where it was like, oh, it doesn't take place in New York. It takes place in Metropolis. It doesn't take place in like, or I know Gotham has been considered like New Jersey as well, but like, oh, it's not New York. It's Gotham. It's not, this city. It's Midway, it's Starling, it's Opal. It's like not like places that are known in the real world. It's definitely like the separation between what is real and what's in this fantasy world. And I feel like James Gunn is really going into what makes that work, what makes that, sort of um makes that, I guess the right word would be just sort of like making that like sort of what DC is and what it initially was, and kind of bringing that back. And I feel like that's definitely the right way to go. And I feel like what I also like how it's not with the DCU. I do like how they're going for Elseworld stories, how they are kind of like going like everything for DC. Like we mentioned, like the Christopher Reeve Superman thing, even though that's not necessarily about Superman, it's like how like this guy like did this, huge thing, was pretty much brought this new era of like superhero stuff when it was like, oh, it was usually like small screen. It took a while to like really kick off, but it was he brought this like huge thing, and now we're
It's
looking at this more,
yeah,
the man of the Superman type of thing. And I liked that
it's
as
seminal. Yeah, it's. I was reading an article recently that Kevin Feige was talking about how he still thinks that the first Superman movie is the perfect origin story, and that that they at Marvel Studios, before they make any new movies, they sit down and they watch the first Superman movie because they just like to remind themselves of like, what a perfect origin story for a superhero movie looks like. And that's like, a great compliment to get. Obviously, Christopher Reeves is many years senior of most people working in the industry today, and that was a different era in terms of like how movies were made. But still, to this day, it's iconic. The other day we were talking about the score of those Superman movies and how that John Williams score is, probably it's going to be hard to top it. I mean, you can do something different and a new uniquely identifiable, but it's going to be hard to do something that's going to maybe try to go in the same direction and do better than that because of how iconic it is. And the biggest thing about DC acquiring the Superman, the Christopher Reeve story documentary, to me that speaks volumes about where their priorities are in this new era. Like
definitely, yeah.
with James Gunn and Peter Safran in charge, and David Zaslav also, over there at Warner Brothers. Um, they want to, honor the legacy of DC, which is filled with fantastic, absolutely amazing, projects all the way back to even the Adam West Batman. There's people look back fondly on that now. It's like it's campy, sure, but it's fun. And the Superman movies, the Batman movies, and Michael Keaton, and then all the other recastings that they did in the 90s with Val Kilmer and George Clooney, but then even the Dark Knight trilogy, and you keep moving forward, whether it's Superman Returns or any of the DCEU projects. It feels like while with some of the DCEU stuff, they're trying to bury the controversy. Overall, James Gunn is interested in elevating the DC brand across the board, and that's by taking care of their own, whether it's Christopher Reeve, somebody who went through a harrowing journey in the latter half of his career, and of course, still to this day, I think when you ask a lot of people who their Superman is, a lot of people still point to Christopher Reeve Superman.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that speaks volumes to the vision of James Gunn and Peter Safran, that they're not just trying to chart a way forward, but they're also trying bringing the past along with them,
Yeah.
whether it's for inspiration or to just honor that. And that's something that we've, I think, in a lot of ways look positively at Marvel too. That they've done that, where you walk into the Marvel offices and you got like those Iron Man suits just sitting there. And I'm like, the Marvel Studios is the house that Iron Man built. And quite frankly, it's valid for them to have that on display and boast it proudly. So I think a lot of the same is true at DC, but with Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, those classic characters. I wanted to ask you, actually, this is a little more news related, but James Gunn recently hinted that there may be a Monkey Man project in the works at DC. Like, or like, I don't know if it's meant to be part of the DCU or an Elseworld project. But I was looking this up. I'm like, who is Monkey Man? So I wanted to get like, A, have you heard of this character? B, tell us who this character is, and how would that even work within the DCU?
The only thing I could think of is the new Monkey Man movie coming out, which is Dev Patel, but I don't think that's the same character. I don't think I heard anything about this. It would definitely be really weird, especially with the picture on screen right now. Definitely be weird, definitely be fun. But yeah, I think that could definitely bring in sort of that like wily sort of like weirdness, that like again that variety. Like again, we're kind of, I know Deadpool is like the popular thing right now in terms of like weird characters, but I think like you could even go further with that, like go really weird with it if this is the character. I am totally unfamiliar with this character. I have no idea who this character is. Um, but I mean, it could be
I think he also goes by Monkey
fun.
Prince. And it could be that it was just like an tongue in cheek sort of a thing, and rather than an actual project.
Yeah.
But speaking of like characters that are completely eccentric and um, out there and not something you'd expect. You were mentioning earlier that we're kind of going in a direction that's a little more campy, a little less serious, and like less of the Zack Snyder-esque vision and a little more of what we got in the Suicide Squad and the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. How do you feel? I mean, obviously, looking at the slate, I had this up earlier. Let me throw this back up. Which is, you look at the 10 projects they announced, and it's an eclectic bunch. Is one way to
Yeah.
describe it. The Authority and the Superman. I mean, the Authority and Superman movies will have some crossover because they'll have some similar characters. But when you look at some of these other projects, like
Mhm.
Swamp Thing, on one end you have Swamp Thing, on the other hand you have Waller, then you have Creature Commandos, and you have Paradise Lost. It's like,
Yep.
if you were to watch a few frames from each of those projects, it's like completely different worlds. And while I think they tried to kind of lean into the worlds of DC in the DCEU days, and to show these like wildly different environments that all existed within this universe, which is something that I think was in contrast to like Marvel, where everything kind of looks similar and familiar, and feels like it's all part of the same universe. But I think the DCEU might have gone a little bit too far, where it was kind of hard to reconcile all of those different worlds,
Yeah.
like the Aquaman movies, like not quite lining up with the Justice League movies version of Aquaman. So
Yeah.
but whereas here, it seems like what they're trying to do is they're trying to give you all the colors of the rainbow, but then at the end of the day, they're still gonna give you something that feels cohesive, and
Right.
it's whether it's through crossovers or otherwise. My question to you would be like, do you think this is just how they're starting out, and we maybe it's a way for them to come out with a few safe picks and a few more out there projects,
Yeah.
And then later on they're going to kind of settle into more of a norm of like, all right, so we're going to go with the stuff that's working and not so much taking any risks. It's especially like when you look at the MCU, they've sort of um, taken risks, and some risks have worked out, some have not worked out. And even sometimes nowadays when they take a risky project, they're playing it safe, and that gets criticized. And now you're starting to see a lot of the characters that have already had significant work done with them, like Daredevil, like Deadpool, play a bigger role in the world of the MCU. Do you think we're going to end up down the road in a situation where, under James Gunn and Peter Safran, we just get like 5 Superman movies, 4 Batman movies, and like what we have had in the years past, like these core characters that have dominated the DC landscape? Or do you think under James Gunn we're going to go in a direction where we'll always have like a Waller show, which or like a Booster Gold thing or Swamp Thing, something that's so, or the Authority? Like I'm pretty sure you remember when they announced the Authority, people were like, "Wait, what?" Like, and then and all of a sudden, like, there's so many people looking up what the Authority even is
Yeah.
because of how out there, like, it's completely left field. Like, so which direction? I mean, I have a feeling you're gonna say the latter, but like, which direction I'm interested in seeing. Like, do you think they're gonna be going down, especially once you get past what we are looking at as Chapter 1, Part 1 of Gods and
Yeah.
Monsters? Like,
I
there's so
think
much more to come.
I think there's a reason it was part 1 of chapter 1, because I feel like the part 2 really depends on what the audience reaction is. Um, like if Superman Legacy is like good, and then because the next, if we're going by like when it was announced, because it was Superman, then the Authority, then Brave and the Bold, then Supergirl, then Swamp Thing. If the Authority is the next project, or Swamp Thing, like if both the safe bets work and the weirder stuff works, then I think that we'll be getting a balance. If Superman works, but then like the Authority doesn't, then I think we're gonna lean towards more safer stuff with maybe one weirder thing that's like, let's like dip our toe back in, but not let it go too much. Or if like even the weirder stuff, only the weirder stuff works, then we'll go full throttle into the weirder stuff, and we'll get more stuff like Booster Gold and Paradise Lost and the Authority, where it's just like really like D-list characters, teams, and concepts, and we're getting all of that, and we're just going to go full force with it. And I think that could be really fun, but it all really depends on the first few years of this Brave New World, no pun intended, different company, but it works. And really, see what it's up, because I feel like knowing James Gunn and Peter Safran, these guys have been in the business for a while, whether that be from the creative side or the producing side. They developed probably every facet, every plan for every turnout. Like for chapter 1, part 2, they probably did one where it was like, okay, this is the safe one, this is the risky one, and this is one that's a little bit of both. I feel like that they planned for everything. That's why they didn't announce all of chapter 1 and only 10 projects rather than 20 projects, or however many is in part 2 of chapter 1. So to see what the fans like, because like for me, like looking at every single one of these 10 projects, when obviously there was an explanation, I'm like, oh, I know all of these except for the Authority. The Authority was like kind of like a rough thing. I like knew like I heard the name, but like that was it. Like I pretty much knew everything. Meanwhile, if like a general audience like was going through, it's like I know Superman and Batman, and that's it. So you have like the super
I think
hardcore
like
fans
Booster
that know all
Gold,
this stuff.
maybe
Like
Supergirl and
maybe
Lanterns.
Booster Gold, like Swamp Thing did have a show. He actually had 2 shows and 2 movies. So like maybe people know that, but a lot of people don't know this stuff. So it's like, okay, because it's like this is like I feel like with what we're looking at here, this is something that like everybody knows. I feel like this is something that everybody like would like in terms of fans. I mean, like every fan is what I meant. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like would know, because it's just like Paradise Lost. Okay, Themyscira, we know Themyscira. We've gotten Wonder Woman movies before. Waller, we've seen Suicide Squad. We've seen Peacemaker. We know who Waller is. Booster Gold's a little weirder, he's not really a mainstream character. We did get an appearance on Legends of Tomorrow. We got him in Justice League Unlimited. We got him in Smallville. So he's been in a lot of like smaller TV projects, but we haven't gotten that big step yet. And then Supergirl, she got a movie, she got a popular show, so she's like known. And then Green Lantern, we've gotten the Green Lantern movie. So there's like maybe like a general audience. It's like, okay, I know like kind of some of these concepts, but it's like Creature Commandos is freaking weird. And then the Authority, we even weirder, left bygone thing from the 90s. Let's do that, I guess. So, it's just like we've gotten a little bit of everything, and I think general audiences and um and fans would like obviously know different things, but it's just like I feel like we got like a good amount here, even though
Yeah,
some even though like Waller I'm like kind of weird about, Paradise Lost I'm kind of weird about, like not like weird about, but I don't know if how that'll work, but I'm curious, we'll see. Like, and then we got like Booster Gold, that's like a fan favorite, like a lot of people have wanted to see
a lot
something
of people
Booster Gold
wanted
for
that. Yeah,
years. Because, I mean, we got, like, a movie, like, 10, 15 years ago, like, "Oh, yeah, Blue and Gold, we're gonna be getting," I think it was, like, I wanna say a Greg Berlanti project, like, it was gonna be, like, on the Sci-Fi Channel, and then it, like, never happened. Probably
I'm
good
kind of
because
glad
Greg
it didn't.
Greg Berlanti, not not that great, but, it's fine. But, yeah, but it's, like, sort of, this, like, general thing, and another thing I wanted to, mention because somebody commented it was, the video game stuff. That's something I got really excited about. And even though I think James Gunn was be like, okay, obviously we're not only having, just for this video game verse. He said, okay, obviously we could have video games here, which will definitely, make us love these characters more as sort of like this side thing. Oh, you want a Superman game? Well, cool, we have him fighting Brainiac here or whatever. And then that will be canon in this universe, would be awesome. But we can also get like other titles that are Elseworld stories or just don't take place in this world. And that would be really cool. So I feel like that's just like I feel like ironically, even though it's not called the extended universe anymore, make it an extended universe. Extend it into not just movies, but
I mean,
TV,
that's the
books,
irony of it.
video
It's more,
games. I feel like
yeah,
that's just the way to go. Like, really make it like
yeah,
feel lived in, build that world,
yeah.
get every facet of fan to be a part of this.
Mhm.
Like, some guy who's like just into video games, like he maybe not hates movies and TVs, but he's like, I love video games. I play video games. I love them. That's my outlet. And then he plays this Superman. Oh, the Superman game looks really cool. And then maybe you get, oh, like normally I wouldn't like be interested in this movie, but like now I played this game. I really like this version. Honestly, I'm kind of interested in seeing this movie now. Like that's like sort of that, or like how we're like, oh man, I really liked the Suicide Squad. I'm like intrigued with this Amanda Waller character. I don't know if I would watch this, but like I'm curious now because I love Viola Davis, and this character is such a hateable bad guy that I love to hate her. I'm gonna watch this. So it's like you bring in like all these different like sort of things, and that's what I really like. And probably the biggest thing I like about this kind of like an ending, you know, climax of the discussion is I think the thing that I loved most, even if I didn't love all the names that James Gunn said, was I love the fact he brought in comic book writers into the writers' room. That was sort of like a major step above and maybe respect James Gunn in a lot of ways in terms of him caring about the fans and caring about the roots of these characters. Because I know in this day and age, like comic books are kind of slowly dwindling. There's been like talks that like DC Comics would get sold off or how they would just shut its doors because they like share space in like I think this was back when they were owned by AT&T, but like they shared offices with like AT&T like customer service or something ridiculous like that. I don't know if it was exactly that. But like like the comic book industry is just dwindling because like they sell at most maybe 30,000 comics a month, but even that's like really pushing it. Those numbers are never going to go up again because nobody, even with all these movies and books and TV shows and all this stuff, nobody really cares about the comic roots. But even with that, even with those book roots slowly dwindling, they're still there. that's where these characters came from. So you gotta implement that in some. Obviously, not everything has to be like comic book accurate. It needs to adapt every great. Oh, we need an adaptation of Dark Knight Returns. We need an adaptation of Superman for All Seasons. We need an adaptation of Gotham by Gaslight. We don't necessarily need adaptations, but it's important to remember where you came from. And I think James Gunn knows that because he brought in all these comic writers. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of Tom King's DC work, but like, a lot of people like his stuff, so he brought him in. It's and I think I think Grant Morrison was also brought in, and he's a legend,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
So like he's bringing that in and the reason I wanted to say this because I saw this video of like this compilation of all these interviews of all these writers from uh all these writers from Marvel, and I don't mean to shit talk Marvel. I love both DC and Marvel. I just like with Marvel, like kind of going downhill. It's a shame because I mean, I remember seeing the first Iron Man in theaters with my dad, and I loved that experience, and I loved them ever since. But then it's unfortunately dwindling, and it's sad as a fan to see that. But then you see all these writers that are like, "Oh yeah, I never read the comics. I never read the comics as a kid. I never read, I wasn't inspired by the comics. Like we wanted to create something different from the comics." It's like, then why are you on a comic book movie or show? That makes no sense to me. Like, like how it's like, oh, don't read the comics. Now, whether that's the writer's fault or Disney's fault, I don't know. Because like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier is like, oh, you're put in this bubble. And it's like, oh, we wanted to make these changes. It's like obviously with any adaptation, you're gonna change stuff, obviously. But there's a certain point where you're like, well, there's a reason that these things are being adapted because we want to see bits and pieces from these characters and stories that we love. Obviously, there's gonna be liberties taken with that, but it's like if you're like, oh no, I'm going out of my way not to read the comic books, then what's the point? Like, obviously, not everybody was growing up. Hell, Christopher Reeve himself said in an interview, "Oh, I didn't grow up on reading comics." However, what he did do when he got accepted for the role, he went back and read the comics. He's like, "Okay, I don't know anything about this. My family didn't really grow up with comic books. We were kind of like this, like, super like nerds in books sort of thing." I remember this interview. He's like, like when other kids were reading Superman comics, I was reading like War and Peace as like a 10-year-old. So she's like, that's just my family and where that came from. But but then he went back and read the comics. He's like, this is like so much bigger and better than what people see it as, like, oh, superficial children's entertainment, when he's like, that's really not the case. And he's like, he really fell in love with this character. He really wanted to make sure this character was done right. And that's just really like great because you know what? When you go back and read those comics, you'll find something you love. Obviously, there's just something for everybody, whether that be comics or anime or like anything like that, or well, manga in this case, comics or manga. It's You're gonna find something you love. And it's like, take that inspiration because you're gonna find something you like about this. And that's like kind of the great thing about Reeve. I mean, the man was, again, legend for a reason. And he, you know, wanted to see this character like done right. Richard Donner wanted to see this character done right because I remember that the Salkinds wanted to make him a joke, essentially, just make him like this like slapstick comedy movie. And then Richard Donner came in. He's like, no, what the fuck is going on here? No, 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 no. You got to make sure this is done right. Christopher Reeve joined in, and he's like, okay, started reading this stuff, and he's like, this has to be done right. Being passionate about what you love, be caring about these characters being done right, that's something that like I feel needs to be done in this day and age. Because like I see so many like directors and writers being like, oh, my main goal is to piss off the fans. Why? What's the point then? But with James Gunn getting these comic book writers, whether they are writing their like how like Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is based on that Tom King miniseries, whether he is actually writing that movie or not, he can be there and be like, okay, this is what I did for this character. You can use this, this, and this. This is what I did. You can do these different things. Like have like him be a consultant on what makes these characters work. And I feel like that's so important. And I feel like James Gunn understands that. Whether you like him or not, there is a bit of that respectability there. And I think that works. And I feel like that's, something to like really hold on to, even if you're like wary and unsure about this brave new world that we're, entering, not just of the DCU, but James Gunn's DC for the future, as it says right there. I feel like that's definitely something to love, like something to respect. Like he clearly brought in these comic book writers so that we have something that'll be in touch with those stories that we loved, maybe as children, maybe as teens, maybe as young adults, and now we're getting that vibe in the movies, and I feel like that's
Yeah.
really awesome.
Yeah, I mean it's fantastic, and just going back to the point about how it's an eclectic bunch of projects. Like you see,
Yeah,
they obviously have Batman and Superman involved, and have a Wonder Woman related project. They have a Supergirl project, and a Green Lanterns. All these are members of the Justice League traditionally. But then you have like a lot of these other kinds of projects. Not to mention, you have Peacemaker season 2, which I don't, somehow is gonna exist in the DCU and then and not be part of the DCEU and still be a second season. And then you have Blue Beetle. We know Blue Beetle is going to be in the DCU. We just haven't got a project that's been announced yet. So there's still more projects even beyond the 10 that are officially announced. And what I love about also the idea of making this a universe where you have animated movies and TV shows and maybe even books, right? I mean, it's more extended than the DCEU really was, because by definition of what they're trying to do now, is more of an extended universe than even the DCEU ever tried to be, quite frankly. And the one of the biggest benefits of doing that is you could do a storyline with a set of characters or a character in a game and have it be canon. But if it doesn't work out and it somehow falls flat on its face, you can kind of just like, snip it there and then move on. You haven't spent, $150 million on a movie that flopped. You can start, and then in animation, it's cheaper. It's a lot cheaper to do something animated than it is, in generally speaking, at least, unless you're making a Pixar movie, than it is to do something live action, like, such as what we got last year. Like, if you look at all the movies that flopped, whether it was Aquaman 2 that they spent like close to $200 million on, or like the Wonder Woman 1984 that barely made any money during the pandemic. Even Blue Beetle, like a movie that had roughly just $100 million budget, it didn't make a ton of money. So you have a lot of these examples where DC in the past, they didn't even really consider TV shows. They were like, we're just gonna
yeah,
put these 9-figure budgets behind these big movies and hope that they make a buck. And then you end up with Shazam 2, where the first movie made just enough to maybe justify a sequel, but certainly not enough for that sequel to be, have a much bigger budget, and then to come out at a time where it's not the summer months, and you really don't have the benefit of the audience going onto the theaters in the summer. So I think on all fronts they've got a better plan. It's much more integrated, and we're not rushing to make a Justice League, and we're not doing what the MCU did, which is introduce your core characters, team them up, Avengers. Like, and that's what DC was trying to do before, except they wanted to just skip a couple of steps, and so they fumbled even in trying to even copy Marvel. Whereas now what they're doing is with James
building a
Gunn, he's
world
like, it's building a world. Like, exactly. You're creating a world where you have characters of all
or a
kinds,
universe, I should say.
a universe. Yes, exactly. A fully breathing, living, breathing universe. And I really love that here, because I think you're
Yeah,
you're gonna start to feel that this world is alive from day one. He said Superman Legacy is gonna feel like this world of this new DCU has been around for a long time. It's not just like, the world meets the Superman, as we saw in Batman versus Superman, and how that kind of like opened the eyes of the humans, and everybody in Metropolis and Gotham City and the larger uh, planet-wide population to the idea of superheroes. Whereas Batman had been doing his thing for a while, and there was other heroes that have been around, but like in hiding. Like in this world, it seems like everybody is going to be out there doing their thing, and superheroes are going to be in part of normal life. And I think where Marvel has even struggled with that part in phases 4 and 5 of the MCU, because now it's such a common thing that you might have a giant thing of marble sticking out through the earth that probably displaced enough water to wipe out half the continents on the planet, and it barely gets a brief mention in She-Hulk. Um, in the DCU, they can establish a new norm for like how a world with superheroes, how that looks, and I feel like we've gotten some of that in the Justice League animated shows before, and now for the first time we can get something like that in live action DC. And so I'm really looking forward to that. And I think like ultimately when it comes down to it, the world that James Gunn and Peter Safran have promised so far, because of course we can only go off of what they've promised so far. We really haven't seen it yet. It looks amazing. It looks fantastic. It looks like it's gonna be a probably has a potential to surpass anything the MCU has done, as long as they can, continue to keep the ball rolling in the right direction. Which, like you said, they probably have a plan B, C, D, E, and F in case certain things don't work out. So I'm looking forward to what's to come. I mean, we'll probably be discussing this in more detail and when more updates get announced. And we'll be back tomorrow. We'll be talking about the future of the DCU, and beyond just the 10 projects that they have officially announced, and even some of the other ones that we are aware of. Maybe there's projects that are going to surprise us, that are unannounced, unplanned, as James Gunn has said himself on his social media in recent times, that there are other projects in the works that we don't know anything about really publicly. But much like that Moana sequel that came out of nowhere, there might be a few DC projects that will come out of nowhere, and maybe there'll be pleasant surprises. So guys, let us know in the comments below. What do you think? Are you looking forward to the upcoming DCU slate that we have been talking about? And are you looking forward to some of those projects that we haven't heard of, that might all of a sudden get announced? Like maybe there's a Lobo project. I mean, that people are expecting to be announced, but it's certainly not official. Everybody's playing coy. Maybe that's happening. Maybe there's a Flash related project. Maybe there's other Justice League characters that we don't know yet are going to be involved in Chapter 1. Maybe we're going to get some iconic villains like Vandal Savage or something like that we haven't heard about yet in the DCU. So I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it's going to be a fun next few years, and hopefully, the Creature Commandos is going to land on our doorstep sooner than we expect. I can't wait. It feels like late 2024 is a long time to come. But until tomorrow, we will be back talking about more DC related topics. If you guys like what we're talking about here and you like the way we talk about it, then hit the like button. Of course, that always helps us out. Subscribe if you want to come back for more content like this. And if you have ideas for the kind of things you want to talk about and questions for us, like earlier we addressed that fan question from our YouTube chat, then drop your questions in the chat. If you're not watching this live, drop them in the comments, and we'll do our best to respond to those. If you can't get to them in the show when we're live, then we'll get to them in the next one. I can promise you that. But until the next episode of DC Daily, it's been great talking to you guys. Go out there and watch something DC related, and then come back to us and talk to us about it. We're more than happy to have that conversation. We're all here DC fans, and celebrating DC as a brand, as a fandom, as a culture, as a way of life. So we'll see you next time.